remember that it was Pride Month either, and I had some problems because of that.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but we'll get into that later. What were you gonna say?
I went downtown on Saturday, and like Pride Month has started, so I've seen stuff on the internet. But
yeah.
what was actually happening in Portland was oh god, what did I call it? Like Star Night or Starlight Parade or something. So my brain just sort of forgot that it was Pride Month and was just like, oh yeah, everything was going on downtown for this totally other reason. It's still Pride Month. It's just that happened to line up.
It's interesting that they do that.
Kind of a weird one.
I mean, again, I have my own story to tell, but maybe it's better suited for later. But how have you been? Been busy?
Not busy in the way that you have been, but I've been playing video games. I got games to talk about.
Yeah, I found some time for some games too.
Oh, good.
I'm probably not as deep into them, but
that's fair. Let's just jump right into the hello, everybody, and welcome to the Audio Games Podcast. I am, of course, one of your two hosts, Neil.
And of the two hosts, I am the second one, Matt.
And yeah, man, what have you been up to playing then?
Well, I think the one that we're both going to be touching on here is Animal Well. Like, there's no point in skirting around the issue here. But I have been playing more Hades 2.
Oh, of course.
I am grinding out all of the upgrades. And there's a lot of them.
All of them.
You got all the tarot cards that you can upgrade. You got all of the weapons that you can upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Upgrade all the things at the camp. Upgrade your relationship status with everybody. You can upgrade all sorts of things. And that's part of the wonderful things that you can do with these Hades games. And I feel kind of guilty, honestly. I feel kind of guilty that I didn't play more Hades 1. I know that I didn't really push myself in that game. I don't know if you recall, but I got Hades 1 around the same time that I was evacuated for fire reasons. And so it was kind of like an unwinding, de-stressing sort of thing for me to like get away from the reality of fire everywhere around me. Now that I'm playing Hades 2, I'm playing it more from a perspective of I really want to get everything done in this game that I possibly can.
That's fair. And I mean, I know that game is not fully out, so I'm guessing whatever is there to unlock, to finish up right now, is not everything that even will be there by the time the game is actually coming out.
Yeah, I mean, there's like shadows of certain things that, you have a sense of what's going to be available later on, but there's still so much to do in Hades 2, even like after you've gone through the normal gameplay loop enough. You start to see things like the Oath of the Unseen, which is kind of like the Hades 2 Pact of Punishment.
Sure.
And then there's also a thing called the Chaos Trials, which after you talk to Chaos a few times, they give you like this option to basically run experiments, quote unquote, for them, because that's what they're all about, is like seeing things differently. And those are basically they're almost like daily runs, but they're not daily in the sense that you have specific loadouts and boons that you start with. And then there's also certain like aspects from the Oath of the Unseen that like add to the challenge. So you get little special things from those as well, so it's kind of incentivized. But they're not cruel in the sense that they make you engage with those. A lot of the resources that you would get from both the Pact of Punishment or the Chaos Trials, you can get through other means. It's just a lot harder, or a lot more time demanding.
Sure.
So, there's a lot there, Neil. I don't think that it being early access is deterring me from enjoying this game at all.
Awesome.
And if anything, I am more anticipatory of the things that are coming because I've engaged with them. And again, I want to lean into the fact that Supergiant is very good about the way that they handle their early access, in the sense that they don't just like wall you from content, they kind of like make it part of the narrative in a way. And
okay.
you know, once these things are actually properly in the game, there's gonna probably be dialogue that you just outright miss because there's no reason for them to say some of these things anymore.
That makes sense. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're continuing to enjoy that game. I want to play it really badly, but
play it.
But I also I know myself too well. I just know I'll play it for a little while and then I'll say, well, I'm going to wait for this to come out, and then years will go by and I'll shake my head in shame forever.
Don't you want to be part of the discussion as things emerge, Neil?
I know there will be a whole lot of discussion about that game when it is officially released as well.
I mean, that's fair. And also, you're playing Alan Wake 2 long after it's been released.
I sure am, and I'm really enjoying that game a lot. I had only really played the beginning of it before. Now I feel like I'm probably about halfway.
Oh, okay.
And I hit the We Sing chapter. That was the like one kind of spoiled thing I had about it because, you know, Game Awards had the song going on, and that was like one of the moments everyone was talking about.
Yeah, I still don't really have context for all that, and you know, I don't have a horse in this race. I just know it was a weird thing that happened at the Game Awards, and I was like, okay.
Yeah. The context for it is honestly pretty weird.
I would imagine so.
I'm like, when I'm thinking about the context for it, the context is kind of like a lot of because you kind of have two characters, right? You have Saga and you have Alan, and you can kind of swap between them once you get to a certain point. But Alan's stories are kind of happening in like a dark version of New York City, and him showing up on like a talk show a bunch of times, but like kind of over and over again, but it's different every time.
It's like a Groundhog Day scenario.
Totally. The We Sing chapter is one of those that just goes in a direction that is so far off of the others. And like, I guess the main context of it is like that chapter is retelling the first game in a 30-minute musical while you shoot dudes. It's fucking weird as hell.
Huh. Okay. I mean,
go ahead.
There's been a lot of like experimentation with musicals in video games. More on that later. But yeah, that sounds like certainly the same people who made Control.
Yeah. There's that one very, very musical sequence going on in Control as well, which
they just like being bizarre for the sake of being bizarre.
Yeah, a little bit. It's a really cool sequence just because the way they marry the like live action music videos, various videos going on like into the play space in a way that you haven't really gotten a lot of in other games.
Yeah.
It's a really cool and fun sequence, but I'm really in it just because the vibes that Remedy puts out in these games. I liked Control way more than you as well. The vibes and stuff just really speak to me in the right way. So yeah. I'm fucking enjoying that game a lot.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you are.
Yeah.
It's certainly going to be one that I imagine you're going to see through to the end. You are streaming it.
Definitely.
But you know you're not streaming.
There is a game that I at least saw through to the end I'm going to get, though I know there's a lot more there. And that is Animal Well.
See, I was going to segue to that too.
Oh, we're on the same wavelength with this one. And
yeah, give me a second while I turn off the stupid air filter.
I don't want to go too deep into it because I feel like I probably am a bit further than you. So, where are you at in it?
I've got one ending.
Okay, so you like hit the first credit sequence?
I hit the credit sequence and I was like, there's definitely more here.
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay.
And I mean, it was obvious that there was more there.
Yeah.
But
yeah, they spell it out pretty quickly there.
Yeah.
I will say I did a kind of silly, dumb thing and got to that room from the other direction before hitting the credits the first time.
Okay, you mean the room as in the house?
Yes.
Okay.
What
was the silly thing you did?
Oh, just I bubble jumped the hell up that thing after getting the lantern.
The shaft?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I got the lantern in that last area. Then I went up the shaft because I was like, I went up there once before and I was like, oh, I can't get past this bird, but then I knew how to.
Right.
And then I found that room and I was like, fucking weird. And then I went and did the credits and got into that room again and was like, well, I feel like I did a bunch of work for basically nothing. Oops.
Well, I mean, that's going to happen in a game like Animal Well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of like, I mean, I think that you could say that there's an intended sequence to do certain things, but by and large, it kind of reminds me of a Link Between Worlds, the Zelda game that Nintendo put out for the 3DS, and they're like, you could do the dungeons in any order you want, and you could get the items in any order you want, and it's like, oh, that reminds me of Animal Well.
Yeah.
Because it's set up where you have 4 flames that you're supposed to get. And, one of the great things that I like about Animal Well is that it doesn't really tell you anything about what's going on. You just kind of have a map and you have things on it and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to head in that general direction and figure out where I'm going from there. Mm-hmm. My question for you, Neil, is what item did you get first?
I went left first, so I think I actually might have got the bubble wand first.
You know what? I got the bubble wand first as well.
I kind of did just I started by going left and then just kind of went clockwise around it as best I could.
Okay. I got the bubble wand and then I got the disc briefly and I was like, nah. And then I went a different direction.
Yeah.
And I got the slinky second.
Oh, weird. The slinky was one of the last ones I got, because when I started doing that rotation around, I got stuck in a silly way, so I think I ended up going into that, like, bottom area with the moving platforms.
Yeah.
Before I ended up getting the slinky.
I'm pretty sure that's, like, the yo-yo area.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So I did Slinky, and then after I got the Slinky, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to use this. I left that area and went to the yo-yo area, and I did that area before I finished the Slinky area. But
yeah,
all the while,
that game has a lot in there.
There's a lot. There's a lot in there. There's a lot out of there, actually.
More than I expected.
And then there's a lot out of there that goes in there, and there's a lot in there that happens to go out of there.
Yeah.
And to say that, I think Tunic, Fez, these are both games that have Easter eggs referenced directly in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that the community talks about it is like there's layers to this game.
Yeah.
And you don't have to engage with all of the layers if you don't want. But I certainly have. So let me ask you this, Neil. Well,
yeah.
Do you have all the items?
Yes.
You have all of them?
Yes.
You have the UV light?
Yes.
Okay.
What I ended up doing with that game is I'd gotten one of the, like, secret items prior to my first credit sequence.
And that would be?
I got the remote.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But what I ended up doing in that game is once I got that first ending, I was driven to get all the eggs at least. There was a couple things in the end game where I was kind of like, I feel like there's more I can do. I ended up looking up just a couple of things before being able to fully do that. I think there's 64 eggs that you have to find, and I think I had gotten to 61 before I was like, I just have no idea where I'm even supposed to be looking at this point.
Yeah.
I don't remember, like, there was really just one that I was just like, there's no way I would have found this one. So I don't feel bad about looking that one up.
Which egg?
There's a room where you can do stuff in it, but if you just randomly play the flute, you will find an egg. And I still don't really see anything in that room that indicated, hey, play the flute here. Even with the UV light, like a lot of times the UV light will show you some extra hints.
So play the flute, but like not a specific song? Just play
not
the
a
flute?
Specific song. It's literally just play the flute. And it'll
okay, well, I certainly
happen.
haven't gotten that egg, so I guess we're on the same page there.
That one's a kind of weird one. I'll after the fact tell you about it if you really want. But other than that, the only other thing I really ended up looking up involved the kangaroo, because I had figured out a thing to do with it, and I had figured out that you can see it multiple areas, and I couldn't remember all the areas I had seen it. So I just looked up, like, where are the places this can show up? So I could retrace my steps to find it again and do the thing I was trying to do.
You know, one of the things I found out was that if you have the UV light on, there are certain places that are marked with the little kangaroo symbol. And it really...
yeah.
It really makes you like, oh, maybe the pencil isn't actually a useless item after all.
I did unfortunately get the UV light after that kangaroo thing.
I see.
But it would have been like, if I had those in a different order, I wouldn't have felt stuck in that same way.
Okay.
All said and done, I got all the eggs. I got the, I will say, true ending, if we want to call it that. I don't know if that's accurate, but we'll call it that for now. And I feel pretty satisfied there. I did go a little bit deeper with some of the rabbits you can find.
Yeah, I found like 3.
Yeah, I think I found 2 or 3 on my own, and then I looked up some stuff to look at one of them, and one of them, at a certain point, there's no avoiding looking stuff up for this game, literally. One of those rabbits is a ARG of sorts, where every individual person's game will only give you a piece of the puzzle, and there's 50 pieces of this puzzle. So it wanted you to go out and talk to people and figure this out together.
Yeah. It basically wanted you to street pass.
Something like that, yeah. So when I hit a bunch of that stuff, I kind of said, like, okay, I've hit the limit of where I feel like I need to go. I did look up a little bit more about what's going on, some of the other stuff people have found, and it's pretty fascinating. But it is beyond what I felt like I needed to do, and I'm pretty dang satisfied with that game. My real only like big gripe, I will say, is I really wish there was, at least in a few sections, another telephone save point.
Yeah, I felt like that too. There's certainly been times where I was like died and I'm like, oh, that sucks, and then I like respawn, I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And there's a couple of like very specific areas where like you will trigger something, and then if you die, the phone is in a place where you have to trigger it back the other way in order to actually get back to where you made the first trigger happen, and it's like, it feels punishing in a kind of frustrating way.
Yeah. I agree with that.
But that's honestly my biggest gripe. Everything else about that game I actually think is pretty expertly put together in a really fascinating way, and a lot of the puzzles I did figure out myself were really satisfying to figure out. Putting together like the different faces, I will say. If you haven't figured that puzzle out yet, there's a faces puzzle and a few puzzles involving them that I think figuring those out felt
yeah, no. I've definitely seen the little legend for the faces towards the end of the game, and I pretty much immediately understood like what that meant.
Yeah.
And I also looked up some stuff just because I know that I'm not going to figure out all this stuff on my own.
Yeah.
You know about like the start file thing?
Yeah, that was one of the pieces I read, and I was like, oh, okay.
There ain't no way. I was like, there ain't no way.
You just have to know before you start the game. So...
Yeah, they want you... Billy Basso was like, I want your eyes peeled the moment you start your game.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, dang. And not only that, like, if you have more than one file set and you're actually using them, you're kind of like shit out of luck. You have to delete a file just to hear the thing. But yeah, I think that my take on it is like, Billy Basso played Tunic and he was like, I could make this a little more complicated. And then he did. And it's just like, well, I mean, I appreciate that. But boy, this is not for one person to figure out everything.
I'm not even fully sure I would say more complicated. Just complicated in some different ways, I guess. Like the ARG part, some of the rabbits, sure. At a certain point, it does get fucking insane. But
yeah, there's literally like it wants to print to your printer so that you have a little
I've been hearing stories
puzzle.
about it printing origami to people and stuff like that, which is so
like if
funny.
it detects there's a printer, and then there's a separate version of that, like because this is also out on PlayStation, obviously. So PlayStations aren't typically hooked up to printers, so there's this whole alternative way of doing it, and that means that he basically had to figure out two separate puzzles of similar complexity. And, you know, I have nothing but love for the game and, like, all the ideas that he had implemented, because he had a lot of ideas. And I think that the really thing that makes this game stand out is that it takes the Metroidvania formula and it makes it fresh again. You know, the upgrade systems of a Metroidvania are pretty much always cookie cutter. You know, you have the double jump, you have the infinity jump, or, like, the super high jump that you can redo over and over. You know, you have the thing that lets you, like, get through a certain gate. But Animal Well does it all very differently, in the sense that, like I said, you can get the items basically in any order, but they do, like, in a way, give you the mobility that you would get from other items, but in a much more unique way, right? Like, there is no double jump in Animal Well. There's a bubble jump, which rhymes with double jump, but it's basically like the bomb jump for Metroid, except a little easier to do.
Yeah, and getting good at that bubble jump is going to serve you very well.
Yeah, and I think that you could get pretty far throughout the game without engaging with that at all, right? I know that there's certain puzzles that involve disc jumping, where you land on the disc as you throw it.
That one I never found myself. I did find riding the disc, but
yeah,
I didn't. It took me until, like, when I was looking stuff up to figure out, oh, you can do it from a jump going in one direction. You don't have to bounce it off a wall first.
Yeah, I definitely was banging my head against a wall trying to get it to bounce just right.
Yeah.
During certain puzzles, but then I found out, oh, you can just, if you time it correctly, land on the discs as you're throwing it. But yeah, you know, it's just a lot of layers there, literally. Yep. And I don't know if I'm gonna bother doing all the bunnies.
I definitely, that's where I tapped out, was like, I'm not doing all the bunnies. I'm just gonna look up what people found, which includes people finding like literal letters written by Billy to the people being like, wow, thank you so much for finding all this shit. I never expected anyone to actually do it.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
The bunny layer is not the last layer.
No, it's
weirdly
not.
enough. The last layer involves like this weird ASCII art set of quotes that you get from doing really ridiculous things. I mean, some are easier, some are harder. Like the first one, I think, is beating the game in 30 minutes. You get to the big cuckoo clock, and then there's a bird that like tells you one.
I was really wondering about some of those, because you get the ability to do you figure out some ways to fast travel in this game that are pretty different.
Yeah.
And I think there might be some ways to kind of skip to some of those places. So you're not really beating the game, you're just figuring out how to kind of break it to get there.
I mean, there's also wrong warping with bubbles, if you didn't know.
Wrong warping with bubbles?
Yeah, so if you play a warp song with a flute on the same frame that you're lifted off a platform using a bubble, so like you kind of stand half off the platform, if you time the frame correctly, instead of warping to the warp room, you'll warp to a completely different room.
What the fuck? Okay.
Yeah, and the speedrun uses that pretty liberally.
I bet.
You basically get the credits rolling before you even encounter the Manticore, so
yeah.
It's a wild game.
It is.
Certainly up there on my list for games this year. It was a complete surprise to me. I know a lot of people were, following this because of Donkey.
Yeah. I'll admit I was pretty aware of it because of Donkey, but
okay. Well, I mean, I like Donkey. I'm not like a big Donkey head.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't watch his streams or anything either, but I do try to keep up with his videos.
Well, it was basically in Steam. I saw it at the top of the top sellers. I was like, "What is this?" And I watched the trailer. I was like, "Is this Donkey talking?" And then I found out basically that he was the one who produced the game through his company. What I find really annoying though is a lot of people just thought Donkey made the game.
Yeah, not at all. He's producer / distributor.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand what a producer actually is. Which is, I guess understandable considering the word produce literally means to make.
Totally.
But no, it was made by Billy Basso, and big shout out to that guy. Very smart dude. Really creative, a lot of interesting ideas. Animal Well originally started out as a horror game, Neil.
Yeah, you can still see some of those vibes.
Yeah, you definitely can.
in a few specific parts, especially.
Yeah. Like I said, I kind of pieced out on the disc. I made one strong attempt at that, and I was like, this guy's not going to stop chasing me, is he? And then he just kept chasing me. And then later on, I figured out what to do about it. But yeah, Animal's great. You're going to probably be hearing more about Animal Well in the top games of the year. Just putting that out there.
Yeah. We do like that style of game.
And with that, Neil, I think that we might have tapped out our game talk, unless you have other things you want to touch on.
Would be remiss not to mention at least one other game that I did finish up.
Oh, okay.
And that's Dragon's Dogma 2.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You were playing that, weren't you?
Yeah. I talked a little bit about that game over the last few months on our podcast here. I didn't stream it or anything, but I feel like I have to talk about a big, wild kind of ending-ish sequence part.
Oh.
So spoilers.
He has to, guys.
I have to.
He has to.
So, when you launch this game, it just says Dragon's Dogma. When you make a new character and you start running through the world, the title card just says Dragon's Dogma. At about 70 hours in, I was heading towards the end of the game, and I was doing the thing to trigger the, final act, so to speak, in order to do the true ending.
Okay.
Which does require, a very specific thing near the end of the game. And when you do that, you have a big world change that happens. The game kind of changes the way time works, because this game does care about time. And you go on a kind of slightly different mission, but it gives you a Dragon's Dogma 2 title card at that fucking sequence.
Okay.
And then the title screen, when you're loading the game up, says Dragon's Dogma 2 now. But that means, for some fucking wild reason, you don't get the Dragon's Dogma. This game is Dragon's Dogma 2. The game never officially tells you, yes, this is in fact Dragon's Dogma 2 until fucking 70 hours into it. It's so silly. I can't believe it.
Well, I mean, the implication there, Neil, is that you were actually playing Dragon's Dogma 1 up until that point.
Yeah, exactly. And
it makes me wonder, is this a retcon thing? What's the implication there?
I think yes and no.
I see. So it's like kind of like an alternate Dragon's Dogma
I remember
Dragon's Dogma 2.
I remember telling you a little bit about the Dragon's Dogma 1 kind of big reveal at the end of the game.
Yeah, you get a little bit of lore.
Yeah, this game is still very much leaning into some of that, but I will say Gran Soren, which is the city that exists in Dragon's Dogma 1, while never officially being told to you, hey, exists in this world, if you're familiar with the architecture and everything, that fucking place is in Dragon's Dogma 2.
Okay.
It is ruined. It is not... You're not going to see it in the same light or way, but Gran Soren is in there. This exists in that world. It is a sequel of some kind.
Okay. So we're looking more like a Nier situation.
Yeah. I think that's probably closer to how you would look at it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I respect it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I respect it too. I am not a big open world game guy. This game worked for me in a lot of ways. I will say a little bit of the mid-game got kind of samey for me just because my biggest gripe for this game, it'd be really nice if they had a couple more enemy variations for like the base normal dudes you run into while running around.
Let me tell you, Neil, open worlds do have a big issue with enemy variety.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I still had a fucking blast. So fucking whatever. But Dragon's Dogma 2, it sure is a fucking game, and I'm shocked that
I'm glad you finally played it.
It held me that long. Thank you. Me too.
I'm glad you finally got to the part where it's Dragon's Dogma 2.
Me too. And it was a good part. I liked that part a lot. That part of the game mixed it up in a good way.
Like, how much longer was their game after that actual title drop?
Probably like 10-ish hours.
Dude, Dragon's Dogma 2 is too fucking short. You got had.
I know. Fucking $60 or whatever for that game, and it was only 10 hours. How could they?
It's messed up. Alright, well.
But yeah.
I'm glad you got through it. I'm glad you were delighted and surprised with how they move things around. It sounds like they made some creative moves there. I like that. Not going to be playing it, though. Because I don't have time for both. I don't have time for both Dragon's Dogmas right now.
That's
let
fair.
alone Dragon's Dogma 2, even though it is only 10 hours. Okay, well, you know what I did have time for is watching that Sony State of Play.
Yeah, me too.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, well, there's really only two things that I think we should talk about because I was bored out of my mind by most of it.
I think being bored out of our mind is worth talking about, though, because
okay.
I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with so much of the overproduced stuff that you see at these showcases now. Overproduced is like the key word for me when I was watching this. Like, this looks like they put way too much money into this to try and make everybody a Thanos, you know? Everybody is just a mocap actor with their literal mocap faces being painted over. You know, it's like, you might as well just use practical makeup and film them at this point. Because so much of, like, graphical processing is going towards, like, that photorealism that they're trying to achieve. And if you haven't caught on, I'm talking about Concord, the hero shooter that was highly touted at the beginning of this State of Play.
I couldn't actually remember the name of it. I knew what you were talking about, and I was like, fuck, what was the name of the game? Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually a pretty bad sign if you knew what I was talking about, but you can't even give me the name. But yeah, it's a hero shooter, as it turns out. I wouldn't have known that just watching the trailer that they put out, because they literally were just trying to make some sort of like clone of Guardians of the Galaxy, it seemed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly the feeling they were going for, and certainly the feeling they achieved, but not without pulling back the veil of they were definitely trying to go for that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's when you feel the effort of trying to achieve something that already exists that feels kind of gross. And it's not just in the sense that, like, they tried to make it like Guardians of the Galaxy, but they're also trying to make it like Overwatch. And I hate to, like, put Overwatch at the head of everything else, but it was like kind of the original hero shooter. Like, let's be clear here. I mean, okay, well, what would you put out there?
I have trouble saying Overwatch was the original hero shooter in the same way that I would have trouble saying, like, World of Warcraft is the original MMO.
Okay,
like, it's not, but it definitely was the one that got big and popular in a way that
it was
made it mainstream.
Hero shooter. Well, how about that?
I'll take that.
Let me tell you, if you're going to chase coattails in the gaming industry, I feel like Overwatch is not the person to chase.
Yeah, Overwatch really, boy howdy, it was fucking awesome when it first was new, and
let me tell you,
it fell off a cliff.
I get it, because Overwatch is kind of in its swan song period right now. Like, Overwatch 2 has been kind of a joke, right? And so it feels like there is like space for someone to kind of slip in and usurp things. But I don't think that you're going to do it by trying to be Overwatch 2 when Overwatch 2 never happened. And it feels like Concord is directly trying to be like, hey, we're actually Overwatch 2. And I'm like, I don't want another Overwatch.
That's fair.
And then later in the same presentation, we had Marvel Rivals, which is another hero shooter. And I'm just like, please stop. We're getting oversaturated again. And this is the other key statement. First is overproduced.
Marvel. Everybody's always asking, when's Marvel?
That's not what they mean, Neil, and you know it. Nobody asked for this. But again, it's the second half of like my cornerstone of thought for this. First is everything feels overproduced, and second is everything is chasing each other's coattails, trying to capture the AAA feeling that has grown stagnant.
Well, it's also, I feel like it's a particularly noticeable right now amid the contraction we've been seeing in the games market. And, all these reports come out of like, what are the games people are playing? They're games from 5+ years ago. The most popular games still are, Mario Kart Deluxe 8 and Fortnite and all these.
Now, hold on. That's not necessarily true. Like, there's a lot of people playing Helldivers, right?
There are. That was kind of a breakout.
Generally, whenever I talk to someone who's more on the casual scale of gaming, they tell me, "Oh, I'm playing Helldivers too," and I'm like, "Yeah, I expected that."
Yes,
and like again, I have no vested interest or personal interest in playing Helldivers 2, but I do respect it for being a new thing that has captured the audience that it has.
Totally. But even then, Helldivers 2 is very much trying to be one of those multiplayer, keep on playing, we are a service game, not a game you can finish. And so seeing all these hero shooters and stuff being what they're trying to put out is they're just trying to find another foothold for a consistent amount of money to keep coming in rather than something they can sell once.
Sure, but I'm going to tell them right now they're not going to do that by trying to encroach on a market that's already calcified to the point that ain't nobody leaving the games that they're playing. This is kind of the curse that they've created themselves,
Totally.
People playing Destiny 2.
And that's the problem, right? Is we don't want these games because if we want to play those games, we can just go fucking play Overwatch. We can just go play these other ones that we already own that are these games.
Yeah.
They have communities already. Yes, Helldivers is a great example of something that broke out, something that became a big new one. But, a Helldivers clone isn't going to hit the way Helldivers does for at least a decade at this point now.
Yeah. Okay. I think
people are going to chase it, and you know it.
I think that there is an art form to maintaining your audience, okay? And I think that in, the middle, I guess, B tier of development, we're seeing a lot of, usurping going on.
Mm-hmm.
Think of, Phasmophobia, Remember that? Remember Phasmophobia?
I do. We played it a few times and then never got back to it.
Yeah, we did, and we never did. But you know how many like things are copying that formula now and actually like breaking out?
Oh yeah, those. I know. What is it? Something Squad. I know of two. There's like a YouTube one, a fake YouTubing one.
The tuber one, yes.
And there's the
Lethal Company.
Lethal Company, that's the one, yeah.
Yes. And this is the same format of game. I mean, to different degrees of like what genre they're like trying to encompass, at least in terms of like thematics. But like mechanically, these are like the same games.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. And they are very much like the flavor of the month.
Did
like
Phasmophobia
right now,
ever actually come out?
I don't know.
Okay, just checking. I remember doing early access with it, but I don't know if it ever released officially. Got a 1.0.
You're asking the wrong guy.
That's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, you know, I think that given 2 or 3 more months, we're going to see something take over the most recent iteration of Phasmophobia. And this is the market that they should be trying to capture, because this is the fickle market. The people who have invested time into, you know, building out their battle pass for Helldivers 2 or Fortnite aren't gonna easily like loosen their grip and like start playing something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you can make a mid-budget game that will, you know, you can get some VTubers to play and then all of a sudden everybody wants to play it, then do that. Just stay away from my sacred indie games.
Well, State of Play wasn't really about indie games.
Certainly wasn't.
But they did say, hey, guess what? God of War Ragnarok's coming to PC, which, yeah,
big surprise.
We all expected it just, you know, 3 years after it came out, like always.
You want to make me happy? Put Bloodborne on PC.
No, it's never
when are you gonna do it?
They won't.
Well, if they're desperate enough, they will.
I feel like they should have been desperate enough by now, but yeah, fair.
Well, listen, it's all about growth, Neil.
All about growth.
Growth over growth. Eventually, they will get greedy enough that they will.
That's fair.
I'm not saying it's going to be a good port, but it's definitely going to get there eventually.
Well, speaking of a
5 years or 10 years from now.
Speaking of a franchise that had a lot of growth in the last bunch of years.
Oh, Silent Hill 2 remake, yeah.
Oh, I didn't want to talk about that
one. Well, here I am talking about it.
I didn't even remember that they showed it at State of Play because I'm so disinterested.
Well, here's what I'll say about it. At least in the way it was presented at this State of Play was better in how it was presented before. And I say that because the last time I saw it, almost every clip was about Harry wielding a pipe and like doing combat.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
Which I think I said back then, that is not what Silent Hill 2 is about. And I think maybe enough people felt that way that they were like, okay, we can't just show the new combat system. We have to actually, you know, maybe talk about the setting or show something that's not fighting. And they did. And I'll give them exactly half a credit for that. I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to be good, but hey, the fact that Silent Hill's getting interest that's serious, the fact that Konami's doing a game,
or at least paying other people to do a game,
or paying other people to, you know, work on their beloved franchises. I think that is a step in the right direction. We'll just see how many steps backwards it goes once the game is out there. Mm-hmm. And I know you want to talk about it, Neil. I do, but I also want to mention Infinity Nikki.
The worst name of anything ever.
Infinity Nikki. Yeah, I don't. What's your take on Infinity Nikki, Neil? I want to hear.
My take is I'm so severely disinterested. The name is the only thing I really remember about it, and it looks like fucking anime. Like,
okay,
that's what I got.
Here's my take, Neil, and I'm going to put this out there, hoping that I'm not right, but this is what I felt.
Okay.
Infinity Nikki looks like the Tales of company, Namco, I'm not sure which division of Namco makes Tales of, got the rights to Balan Wonderland.
Oh.
Or Balan Wonderworld. Is it
no,
Balan
I know what
Wonderland
you're
or Balan
saying.
Wonderworld?
It's Wonderworld, but no, I see what you're saying. Gross.
And yeah, so just the weird tone of it, like the ending of that trailer was like there's an evil person like chained up and like saying something foreboding, but like the rest of that trailer is just like little animal mascots and fashion. And I'm like, what are we going for here?
Yeah.
It
Nothing
was
I want to
one of the more
with.
distinct showcases of that. And then there was the Astro Bot game, which is literally they took the demo for PlayStation 5 and made a full game out of it. And that, it looks fun.
Okay,
it's a full platforming game.
To be fair to Astrobot, they also had that VR game on PS4 that people said was really good. And that was a platformer.
Okay. Well,
so this is the third game in that franchise, so to speak.
Okay. Well, that's outside of my vision. I had no idea that was even a thing. But let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room. The giant 4v1 PVM monster in the room.
They showed Monster Hunter Wilds again.
They did. And
I don't think this was a particularly good thing. Not Monster Hunter Wilds in general, but like this showing of it. And I'll tell you why. It felt thrown the fuck together last minute. And given the fact that, like, the Monster Hunter people have gone and, like, done more, like, the next day or something, and talked about next week at the Summer Game Fest, they are planning to do another showing for this in some way, makes me think, oh, they had a big plan for Summer Games Fest. They are going to do like a big reveal. And then Sony was like, hey, we feel like our state of play is weak and we know that you're very popular and people love you. Can you throw something together for us real quick? And they just went, sure. And threw together a kind of not particularly good trailer.
Neil, I am glad that you feel this way because I was coming in with negativity for this.
Okay.
And I was like, he's so excited to talk about this. Let me just get everything else out of the way so that we can, tackle this. But I agree.
I was excited to talk about it because I knew we would both have feelings.
I feel like this was an extremely poor showing for that trailer.
Yes.
The thing about Monster Hunter Wilds is that the thing that it's going for that other Monster Hunter games have not gone for is the world. Right?
Yes.
We're supposed to be seeing the sense of scale. They showed a little bit of ecology, like the way that certain monsters are interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they spent so much time trying to block out any sort of views of the distance with sandstorms or thunderstorms or what have you. And then they focused on things like the characters, which, by the way, this is definitely like a Monster Hunter World style character situation where they look more like actual humans. I have feelings about that. That was probably one of the things I hated the most about Monster Hunter World.
Yeah, but that's the one that sold the most, so of course they're going to go that way.
It's certainly the most produced of the Monster Hunter games. And again, what was one of my keywords for this state of play?
Overproduced.
And for all of the production that was shown, I was so disappointed that we did not see more of a sense of scale. And, it's not that this was lacking in cool things. It was nice to see how the movesets have evolved of certain weapons, and you can kind of see how the mobility that you have with a greatsword now would probably lean into the fact that you're supposed to be moving around a lot more. But without seeing those environments, which are like the other half of Monster Hunter games, it kind of lacked any sort of intrigue for me.
Well, one of the bigger things that got me was they showed us 2 brand new monsters, which is awesome. I kind of like that little alligator tanky boy. What was
but they
it?
weren't like showstoppers
or something.
I feel like most Monster Hunter showcases have a showstopper monster.
Yes,
right.
And that's the thing.
These are like fodder monsters.
And that's kind of pieces 1 and 2 for me. I feel like Normally, their first big showing gives you a glimpse, at least, of the flagship. That felt true for World. That felt true for Rise. I obviously haven't been following the franchise like you have, but that is a thing they do. We saw, like, a little bit something to get excited about with the fucking flagship.
Right. Like, neither of the monsters that were shown are going to be on the box.
No.
You know?
No.
Those are not flagships.
And even then, normally when they show a new monster, they give you, like, they show you some cool shit that monster is doing. These were getting cut away too quickly for us to even see the monster, like, land a big hit. We got nothing. It felt like they just didn't want to actually show anything yet. But that said, I am still excited. Reading about some of the stuff they put up on their website following this actually had better and more interesting information to me. Talking a little bit about, like, the world, so to speak, or worlds. And like you said, ecology seems to be a big part of what they're going for this one. Unlike in World, where we kind of had the, like the forest area, and you'd have nighttime or daytime, but, like, it's the forest area. This one is like, hey, we're going to make these big areas. They've only really shown us the one that's kind of this bigger field, Sahara almost looking area. And it can be barren, it can be lush, or it can be full of a thunderstorm. And this sounds to me, with the way they're talking about it, that, like, all the areas might be treated a little bit more like the guiding lands from World, Iceborne, where you can kind of jump in there and just run around and do stuff, and monsters will come in and out, and you might start a real hunt during that. But,
I'd
but
like
also
to see
the world
things
might change around you.
Yeah, I'd like to things just kind of evolve more organically instead of, like, menuing things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to, like, rather than, like, set up a mission with, like, a little blurb explaining why you're hunting the monster, I want to see that happening and react to it. Like, that's one of the things that I think that was kind of lacking, and not because they weren't trying hard enough, but just because of the lack of support that they would be able to get from the hardware side of things. I think that we're in a point where innovation, needs to start showing up for the Monster Hunter series to keep it fresh, because we know what we're getting when you get the game, but what do we not know what we're getting?
New monsters, new movesets. We're excited about that, but this was not a great show for it. Next week, though, we might come to our next podcast and then be going like, "Holy shit, that Monster Hunter trailer!"
I'm gonna come to the next podcast and be like, "Holy shit, Sony State of Play sucked even harder than I thought."
Yeah, maybe. But we have some other shit to talk about. You went places, you did things. I got to hear about some of that before we wrap up here.
Yeah, I've had a pretty busy last couple of weeks. There's a reason that there was a larger period between podcasts, and that's because of me being occupied by multiple things. If you're a longtime listener to Part-Time Gamers, then you know that May is a busy month for me because I'm in crunch for convention, and that convention is Fanime, and I attend every year. And whenever I go, I feel like I get my finger on the pulse of, like, what's hot in nerd culture. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, Neil, I think that you're with the crowd on this one. Couldn't walk 20 feet without seeing a Frieren cosplayer.
That makes a lot of sense.
I will say that Frieren is not the most complex design of a character, so that certainly enables more people to engage in that, but it's not to say that it hadn't captured the hearts of many people. It had.
Yeah.
And going into convention, I didn't want to be blind to that. So I sat down and I watched, like, I think 3 or 4 episodes of it, and I was like,
hell yeah,
kind of indoctrinating myself. I see the charm of it.
It's real damn good.
I feel like it might end up being kind of a bad time more often than I would like it to be.
How do you mean?
Well, it's just very bitter. The whole existential crisis of Frieren is that she outlives all her friends.
Oh, sure.
And so she has to deal with the fact that, like, the people that she is getting to know even now are probably going to be dead before she is.
It's true.
I don't know how much it leans to that, but that's the feeling that I get with the first few episodes. But yeah, there's a lot of free runs, a lot of ferns. It's also kind of validating in a way because I'm kind of at an impasse with Genshin Impact. All right, I don't talk about Genshin Impact that much on the podcast because it kind of waxes and wanes very heavily. There's these periods between big updates where it's like, well, you know, there's this event here and that event there, and, you know, I can grind out some stuff, and here's some interesting characters, but by and large, it's the same gameplay. And the way that they try and mix that up is with the new characters, and that's not always going to feel unique.
Sure.
Because there's only so much you can do when your gameplay revolves around the same kind of things that, like, any MOBA does. You got your normal attack, your skill, your burst. There's only so much you can milk from a single character, and only so much that you can milk from the engine itself, the way that you set up the skeleton. And, you know, I think that I am in a period where I'm starting to get back into it. Like I said, it waxes and wanes. But I wasn't sure that I should be. And then I went to Fanime, and I saw everybody was still cosplaying Genshin, and that everybody still loves that shit. And I'm like, okay, well...
Okay.
I'm glad that it's still popular. I'm not necessarily glad that the business model is what it is. but people are still loving that shit, and it feels good.
Well, I am continuing to hold true to my promise. Zenless Zone Zero, when that comes out, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna play it. We're gonna see how long it keeps me.
Yeah, I hear that's gonna be a pretty big Dante May Cry kind of game.
And it's out in like a month at this point.
Yeah.
So,
I was invited to some betas, and I was like, I don't got time for that.
Yeah, I'm not doing the betas, but I know it's out early next month, and I will be jumping in to the gachapon, and
I hope that it thoroughly disappoints you.
Well, I'm very good at not spending real money on it, so I'm not too worried about that part of it.
You know, so was I, Neil, so was I.
Yeah, so... But also the way you've talked about Genshin, getting it on the ground floor right at the beginning feels like the way to do it with one of these Hoyo Force games. If I really want to experience what's going on with them. Yeah.
What else? Okay, so what I was surprised by. There was a significant amount of Hades representation at Fanime. I saw Hades cosplayers. I saw Hades art in the artist alley. I saw Hades 2 art, and I was like, dude, you probably, like, really put your nose to the grindstone to get these pieces out before this convention. And he was like, yeah, I did. And then what was missing, the things that I felt like should have been more at Fanime, Ranking of Kings. Love that anime. Ain't got nobody out there doing nothing for it.
I feel like
these character designs are so simple. It'd be so easy to cosplay.
They are, but I also feel like the look of that show doesn't necessarily scream, hey, cosplay me.
I mean, listen, Neil, I'm a cosplayer. I look at that and say, that's an easy thing to do.
Totally.
But these are well-made characters with backstories that people are endeared to. And I know you're like, I wanted to go for something flashy, but not everybody needs to be flashy. Okay?
Totally. What I meant more is getting Boji or Kage, especially, like, kind of the two core people of that show.
Okay, well...
Neither one of them feels like a particularly easy cosplay just because of who they are, what they represent.
Sure, I mean... I think that there's some implications there if you decide that you're going to cosplay Boji. You know, that's the appropriation of what Boji is not necessarily, in some people's circuits, the most tasteful option, I guess. But at the same time, I don't think that if Boji were a real person, he would be upset at that.
No, I don't think so either. I just think that as a show, it doesn't... When the protagonists don't necessarily feel like the most cosplayable, it doesn't seem like many people are going to jump in to try to make big cosplays around it.
All right, well, you're on the outside looking in, Neil.
It's true. I am. I'm not a cosplayer. I don't know. That's just where my head goes.
On the ground. I was there. I've seen it. It should be done.
Okay.
Like, imagine how cool it would be to have the Big Four as a group. That'd be a great group.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I found the one piece of art in the artist alley. Explain that, Neil. Yeah, people aren't going to cosplay from Ranking of Kings, but why is there only one piece of art in the entire artist alley?
That's a little bit more surprising to me. I would have expected a little bit more fan stuff around it, but fair.
I showed up to that booth and I was like, you have the only piece of art from Ranking of Kings. I'm buying it. This is not fair. And then it's sitting on my shelf now.
Nice.
But that's not the only event I went to. It was a very busy couple of weeks for me. Literally yesterday, I was back in San Francisco. And remember when I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast how, like, it was Pride Month?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yesterday was the first day of the month.
Yeah.
Of Pride Month.
Yeah.
In San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I forgot. And it was not good for me to forget. Because, oh my god, was every parking lot completely full.
Yeah.
It was so hard to get around.
Yeah.
We got into the city like 4 o'clock, like, or mid 3 o'clock, and we're like, oh, we got plenty of time to go do some other things, so we did. And then we left an hour early to go to the Symphonic Davies Symphony Hall. And it was so close to the Civic Center. And not only was it the first day of Pride Month in San Francisco, but there was a Skrillex concert going on.
Oh, no.
So, I'm contending with all of the people who really love dubstep and all of my LGBTQ brethren for parking space to get into this comparatively little event for some Final Fantasy music played by a symphony. It was an arduous task. And my poor... I'm going to give a direct shout out to David. You know David.
Uh-huh.
Right? He was driving, and at a certain point he was like, just get out of the car and get in there, and I'm going to keep looking for parking. He
Shout
did
out
the
to David.
Self-sacrifice.
That's
Shout
a
out
hell of
to
a thing to
David.
do.
That's a real bro move.
Especially, I've driven around San Francisco. Doing that by yourself, trying to look for parking, even worse.
I mean, it's already like a mentally demoralizing situation.
Uh-huh.
And when nobody's there with you, it's just like, well... But I get it, too, because, like, it's a sunken cost fallacy, right? Like, either everybody can miss out on some, or one person can miss out on some, and he did the trolley problem, and he pulled that lever. Thankfully, he actually got in, like, by the skin of his teeth, basically, like, after the first number, the first song.
Okay.
And then, Tim was there, too, and he was driving separately, and he was also having trouble finding parking. It was just a mess.
Oof.
So, to talk about the concert itself, I was very surprised by the selection. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, this is certainly not my first time going to a Final Fantasy concert. This is like my 5th time going to a Final Fantasy concert.
That sounds about right.
What I will give to the conductor and the producers of this particular season, I guess you could say, this particular tour, is that they picked very different songs. And they went as far as to say that certain songs were picked for San Francisco. Oh. And I think I know which ones.
Interesting.
At least, so they were able to secure a choir, which is not something that they always do for these.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of pieces with vocals. And that was cool, because generally speaking, it's almost always the instrumentals.
Mm-hmm.
But they also secured soloists. So we had a guitar soloist for Via Flamenco from Final Fantasy IX. Great song. I've learned how to play part of that finger style on guitar myself because I like that song so much. And then the entire Final Fantasy VI opera start to finish.
The entire thing?
Yes, Maria and Draco.
Wow.
The entire opera. And keep in mind, like, I was in company that wasn't necessarily, like, indoctrinated to Final Fantasy, and so they're, like, looking at the visuals for 6, and they're like, how did this come out of the Super Nintendo? And the answer is it didn't. This is kind of, the lyrics kind of came after the fact.
It came out with the lyrics kind of being written while you hear a noise going, ah.
Yes, and the funny thing is the vocalist were actually very close to, like, the noises that were used on the sound chip to mimic a human voice.
That's funny.
I think that selection was done on purpose. But yeah, there was a lot of, like, Final Fantasy 1 through 6. They played exactly one Final Fantasy X song. They did 2 Final Fantasy 8 songs. Like, they whiffed some pretty hard. I was actually surprised by the very limited selection of Final Fantasy 7 music that they played, considering Rebirth had just come out. But yeah, they really shook up the selection. And the weirdest song selection that I've ever heard at one of these concerts was done. And that was the Honeybee Inn song from Final Fantasy 7 Remake. And if you've never heard this song, it's kind of like a burlesque swing funk song.
Okay.
And hearing that played by an entire orchestra was really weird. But they did it because they had a choir, so they could do the vocal part of that song.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was also selected due in part to it being Pride Month.
Sure.
I don't know how familiar you are with a Honeybee Inn.
I know a little bit about what happens
section.
in that part of the game, yeah.
Yes, so, I think that it was all very thematic, and because of that, it's hard for me to feel like I was denied certain songs that I would come to expect at a concert like this. And again, I appreciate that it's not just the same concert. If you go to these things regularly, the last thing you want to do is just have the same exact experience.
Getting the whole opera from 6 is fucking crazy cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think the only thing that really would compare is, like, all of Dancing Mad, which I think is like a 27-minute song. And they've done it before. I know they've done it before because there was one symphony hall they went to that had, like, the full-sized organ, which was used to play Dancing Mad. And I'm never going to get to see that, so I'll call this my version.
Wild.
Of watching or listening to the entire orchestrated version of Dancing Mad. But yeah, really good experience. Don't regret it, except for the parking situation. And, it's video game adjacent. It's video game music.
Yeah.
Again, like, I think that this reinstilled in me the ability of music to be evocative and enhance an experience beyond what it normally could be. Thinking about Final Fantasy VI and the fact that it had this whole opera section, and they were trying so hard to, like, depict that, not only, like, in terms of, like, the visuals, but also very deeply in the music. It's like, wow, they really put a lot of work into that, didn't they? And they did. It's not easy to do that on a Super Nintendo. But yeah, it's finally starting to calm down for me. I'm probably going to be able to sink my teeth into some more games soon. I have a moving situation I need to worry about in the near future. But
oh gosh.
Yeah, that
just never fucking stops. Being an adult sucks.
Yeah, it's the changing of the seasons. Here we are. So, I don't know. You got any news, Neil?
No. We should call it and then talk about Fallout a little bit after credits, so to speak.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Audio Games is hosted and produced by Matthew Lane and Neil Jimenez. Our theme music is Recharging by Gooset. If you'd like to reach out to us, please email us at audiogamespodcast@gmail.com. Alright, let's talk a little bit about that Fallout TV show.
Yeah, well, I mean, what did you think, Neil?
I feel like you're one of the people that said this. and you were right if you were. Uh,
I did, if I'm right.
It's a very good show in large part because they just tell a story in the Fallout world instead of trying to tell a Fallout story.
Yeah, I think the fact that they didn't try and follow any of the games, they wanted to tell their own unique story using the setting while, being respectful of the lore.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a good job of that too. There are some things that if you've played the games, you'll notice, and that's cool. But they didn't want to lean too heavily into that because I do think the success of the series weighs heavily on the fact that it didn't rely on the games. To tell it.
Yeah.
I have qualms with the ending.
Yeah, me too. The last episode felt like it was kind of the weakest episode overall.
I mean, weakest in terms of like the sense of closure. And here's my theory on that, Neil. They didn't know if they were going to get a second season. I'm going to put that out there.
I guess that's fair. It felt written like they expected one, but that's fair.
Well, yes, it felt written like they expected one, and it felt like they wrote that ending in a rush.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Because I imagine that the writers were sitting in the writing room, and they're like, okay, we basically need to come up with two endings here.
Mm-hmm.
One if we do get another season, one if we don't. And then, when that news finally landed that they were getting another one, they sent the script that was the one that would continue the series out to everybody else, and then they had to like rush to get that done.
Sure.
But I think when you think of like the sequence of events that plays out at the very end, you have the principal female lead finding out that her father was behind all of it, essentially. And then she like falls to her knees and she kneels there slack-jawed while the principal male lead shows up and he's like, what's going on? And then the dad's like, I'm her friend, let me out. And he's like, okay. And then he lets the dude out and he goes into the power armor. And then the female lead's like, he did everything. He's the reason. And then the male lead goes slack-jawed. And they both just kind of stare out into the middle distance. And it's only when the ghoul shows up that things start to like finally start moving again. But by then, the dad's already like fully kitted out in his power armor and ready to like fucking move on.
Yeah,
it's like
one of the
they really just like ripped all of the agency away from these characters in this moment for the sake of him getting away.
The other piece that drove me a little crazy on the end was, hey, we got the MacGuffin, we plugged it in, it's ready to go, we're about to hit the button. Oh no, we're gonna get attacked? I guess we can't hit the button anymore. But then, once I'm dying, I'm gonna come back and hit the button anyway. It's like, why didn't you just hit it and then go fight? Maybe all the lights turning on would have, got some of these people who were about to fight to go like, oh shit, they have power, maybe they have like a secret weapon, like something to make them stall. Anyway.
Sure.
But no, the show overall, I think, was very good. And I also think that probably the most powerful scene, I thought, was the Goggins, so the ghoul in the past finding out, like listening to his wife in that meeting.
Yeah, a lot of people had issue with the way that the timeline jumped around. I thought it was good.
Oh, I thought it was fine.
So, as long as they can, cobble together a good reason for continuing, and then I have faith in a second season. I'll certainly check it out, but yeah.
For sure. Me too.
I felt like that ending was kind of weak.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole last bunch was, like you said, it felt rushed.
But you know what wasn't rushed and feels strong? The ending of our podcast. See you later.
Goodbye, second ending. Bye.